I just felt, in the beginning when it was on a specific, just one muscle. I didn't know exactly what it was.
Alexander Zverev stood in the middle of a Grand Slam semifinal and, live on a hot microphone, all but accused tennis of being rigged. Not in a quiet press conference afterward, not in some anonymous leak, right there on court in front of millions, wheeling on the officials and snarling that the sport shields its golden boys and feeds everyone else to the wolves. "This is bulls," he barked at the supervisor, and then the line that detonated the internet inside of a minute, "You protect both of them." What set him off? 3 minutes, 1 medical timeout, and a single clause buried in the rulebook that turns those 3 minutes into either the smartest survival move of Carlos Alcaraz's life or daylight robbery. Pick a side because the entire tennis world already has. Picture the scene, third set. Alcaraz is 2 sets up but visibly coming apart. He's already thrown up on court twice. He's wincing after every shot, dragging his right leg behind him like it belongs to someone else. The match is turning. Zverev can smell the comeback, and at the precise moment Alcaraz looks finished, he holds for 5-4, waves for the trainer, and is granted a formal medical timeout. 3 minutes of rest. The momentum evaporates, and the match is never quite the same again. Now the part that lit the fuse. Under Grand Slam rules, you are flat out not allowed a medical timeout for cramping. And to nearly everyone watching, Alcaraz looked like he was cramping. So either the rules just bent for the sport's chosen son at the worst possible second for his opponent, the way Zverev howled, or there's something those furious clips aren't telling you. There's also a detail almost nobody clocked. This was Alcaraz's first major without Juan Carlos Ferrero in his box, the mentor he'd split from only weeks earlier. And a chunk of the fan base is convinced a hungrier, more ruthless Carlos walked into Melbourne that night. It's a wild theory. It's also messier than it sounds. So what really happened in those 3 minutes? Did the Golden Boy bend the rules to steal a semifinal? And 2 days later, the career Grand Slam? Or did Zverev just lose the war of his life and need someone to blame? This is the medical timeout that made Zverev snap and split tennis straight down the middle. Let's put it on trial. Start with the facts everyone agrees on because they matter. This was an Australian Open semi-final. 5 hours and 27 minutes of brutal, beautiful tennis. The kind of match that makes legends and breaks bodies. It wasn't even brutally hot, around 30 degrees Celsius, easing as the match wore on, which makes what happened to Alcaraz's body all the more startling. Alcaraz had stormed to a 2-set lead. Then his own body began to mutiny. He had already vomited on court, twice. By the 3rd set, he was wincing after volleys, his movement gone heavy, his right leg dragging. At 4 games all, the limp was obvious. He pushed right up against the 25-second serve clock and, somehow, drew no time violation from the chair. The umpire, Mariana Veljovic, let it slide. 2 separate judgment calls, both falling Alcaraz's way inside 10 minutes. He held for 5-4, and then, in the changeover, he called for the trainer and received a formal medical timeout, rubbing the inside of his right thigh while the physio needed the same spot. 3 minutes of stopped play in the middle of a Grand Slam semifinal. But one clause turns a routine treatment into a scandal. Under the Grand Slam rulebook, a medical timeout is not permitted for cramping. You can be treated for cramps at a changeover. 60 seconds, 3 times a match, maximum. You cannot halt the match for a 3-minute reset. So if Alcaraz was cramping, that timeout should never have happened. And to the man on the other side of the net, it looked an awful lot like cramping. To Zverev, this was not a gray area. It was a robbery in broad daylight. Picture it from his side. You are 2 sets down to the best player on the planet, but you can see it. He is physically falling apart, right in front of you. The match is turning. 20 more minutes, and his legs might simply quit. And at that precise moment, the clock stops instead of his body. 3 minutes of rest, a trainer, a full reset. The momentum you spent 2 hours building just dissolves into a changeover. In a 5-set war, momentum is the entire currency, and it had just been confiscated. That is why Zverev detonated, and notice that his fury wasn't even aimed at Alcaraz. It was aimed at the officials. "This is bulls," he told the supervisor on mic, refusing to drop it. Then came the line that lit the internet on fire. "You protect both of them." Both of them. Not only Alcaraz. Fans instantly tied it to Jannik Sinner, who earlier in that same tournament had caught a break from the extreme heat policy, the roof sliding shut mid-match while he struggled, after which he returned reborn and won. It felt, to Zverev, like the establishment clearing the road for the two players it most wanted in the final. To Zverev, a pattern had hardened. The rules seemed to bend, over and over, for the sport's two golden boys, and never once for him. He has carried a grievance about officiating and respect for years. This felt like the proof. Right or wrong, the rage makes sense. He had done everything correctly and was still, somehow, the one being punished for it. And he wasn't alone in thinking it. Plenty online agreed the timing stank. That is the case for the prosecution, and it is genuinely strong, but every trial has two sides, and the defense is every bit as convincing. If you want the half of this story the angry highlight clips never show you, subscribe, because this is where it gets complicated. Alcaraz tells it differently, and the detail is the whole case. He did not think it was a cramp. In his own words, when he first felt it, he had no idea what it was. He had lunged for a forehand and felt something seize in his right adductor, one specific spot, and his first fear was a muscle injury, not simple fatigue. That distinction is everything, because the rulebook has a second clause. A player who appears to be cramping can still be treated for a genuine muscle injury at the same time. Cramp alone, no timeout. A possible tear or strain, treatment allowed. On paper, Alcaraz fit the second case, not the first, at least by his own account, and nobody, not Zverev, not a single pundit, has ever produced proof he was lying about that adductor. Alcaraz says he told the physio exactly that, and then, crucially, he did not make the decision. The physio did. Players do not grant themselves medical timeouts, the medical team does, and that team answers to the tournament, not to Carlos Alcaraz. Which is the exact point Andy Roddick drove home afterward. Roddick, nobody's idea of a soft touch, said plainly that every player alive would have done what Alcaraz did, that anyone with a cramp could honestly report that a muscle hurts, and that the physio is trapped in an impossible job. He cannot prove a player is lying, so he cannot fairly refuse treatment. The physio works for the whole tournament, Roddick noted, not for one star, and condemning his split-second judgment from a commentary booth is easy and useless. And the kicker? Zverev himself, once the adrenaline drained out of him, walked it almost all the way back. "It's not my decision," he admitted. "I didn't like it, but it's not my decision." Then, the bigger man. This was one of the best battles Australia had ever witnessed, and it didn't deserve to become the story. When the man who lost the argument is the one begging everyone to move on, the prosecution's case starts to wobble. Which brings us to the wrinkle, and let me be crystal clear, this part is pure speculation, a talking point the fan base invented, not a fact and not anyone's confirmed account. Remember the timing. Melbourne was the very first Grand Slam Alcaraz contested after splitting from Juan Carlos Ferrero, the coach who had steered him to 6 majors, the man he openly called a second father. 6 majors built together, then gone in a matter of weeks amid a contract dispute and a power struggle behind the scenes. New team, new voice in the box, Samuel Lopez now running the operation. And so a theory took root in certain corners of the internet that a Carlos cut loose from his mentor had become a hungrier, more ruthless, do-whatever-it-takes version of himself, that the old Ferrero-era Alcaraz would never have leaned on a gray area timeout, and this new one would. It is a delicious story. It is also almost certainly nonsense, because the counterweight is obvious. Alcaraz has been battling cramps, vomiting on court, and dragging himself through 5-set marathons for years, with Ferrero sitting right there in his box the whole time. This kid has always played on the razor's edge of what his body can survive. Pinning a rule controversy on a coaching change makes a tidy narrative, but there is not a shred of evidence that Ferrero's absence had anything to do with a physio's split-second call in a Melbourne changeover. File it under things fans want to be true, not things that are. The simpler truth is that Alcaraz has always been a body pushed to its breaking point, coach or no coach. And the twist the cheating narrative conveniently forgets is the best part. The timeout didn't even work the way the conspiracy needs it to. If those 3 minutes were some momentum-killing masterstroke, somebody forgot to tell Zverev. Because right after the break, he didn't crumble. He caught fire. He snatched the 3rd set in a tiebreak. He took the 4th. He hauled a 2-sets-to-love deficit all the way into a deciding fifth, then broke serve and surged ahead. 5 games to 3, 2 games from the final, and at one point just 2 points from the win. Zverev served for a foothold, double faulted, then watched Alcaraz claw right back. The swing lurched both ways, violently, all night. The man supposedly robbed by that timeout was an hour later the man closer to victory. Alcaraz had to drag it back from the cliff, surviving the 5th set 7 games to 5 on a body taped together with willpower to win in 5 hours and 27 minutes. And 2 days later he beat Novak Djokovic to complete the career Grand Slam, the youngest man in history to hold all 4. That timeout, in other words, sits inside the single most important fortnight of his career, which is why nobody can let it go. Strip away those 3 minutes and maybe Zverev still loses. Or maybe he's a Grand Slam finalist. We will never know, and that uncertainty is the whole fight. So what was that medical timeout really? A cynical rule bend that stole a semifinal? Or 3 minutes of treatment that barely dented a match Zverev nearly won anyway? The footage is identical for both. The verdict depends entirely on who you walked in believing. The trial's over and the verdict isn't mine to hand down, it's yours. Lay the 2 cases side by side one last time. The prosecution, a cramping man, 2 sets up, handed a 3-minute rescue the rulebook flatly forbids, while his opponent watched his momentum get confiscated and roared that the sport shields its favorites. The defense, a player who feared a genuine muscle tear, a physio who alone made the call, a rulebook that does allow treatment for injury, and a respected analyst insisting any pro on earth would have done the same. 2 airtight stories, 1 piece of footage, 2 completely different crimes, and the juicy Ferrero twist? Set it down gently, it's a fun theory with nothing holding it up. Carlos has bled, cramped, and vomited his way through marathons for years, mentor or no mentor. That isn't some new, ruthless Alcaraz, that's just who he has always been. One thing keeps pulling at me though, the single fact neither side can argue with is that Zverev nearly won anyway. He stormed back from 2 sets down to within 2 points of the final. If that timeout was a robbery, it was a spectacularly incompetent one. The match wasn't settled in a changeover. It was settled over 5.5 hours by 2 men emptying the tank until one had nothing left. But maybe you see it the other way. Maybe a rule is a rule, and bending it once at the cruelest possible moment for your opponent is exactly the thing that should never be allowed, no matter who technically made the call. That's the question, and I want your honest verdict in the comments. Fair game or daylight robbery? Did Carlos Alcaraz do a single thing wrong that night in Melbourne, or did Zverev just lose a war and need somewhere to put the pain? Tell me how you'd rule and tell me exactly why. The trophy says Alcaraz. The argument? That one is still going.